He asks, what can the gun community, and he specifies not the government, but the gun community, begin doing to mitigate the potential of these horrific massacres? There's a lot of worthwhile energy put into pointing out why some legislation won't work, but unless the gun rights community starts proposing next steps and not vague solutions, the gun control advocates will continue to claim the moral high ground. So he's basically asking how can gun owners be proactive so they're not constantly feeling like they're on the defensive in the aftermath of these shootings, which I think is a great question. It's obviously something I think a lot of people consider. And I think it is important for the gun community to at least have their own ideas. Unfortunately, I don't know if there's going to be as quick and easy as like a panacea policy solution that you sometimes see on the other side. But I think even something like a see something, say something model where you're very proactive, and obviously, time after time after time with these shootings, it comes out that, there was this incident that happened beforehand and this incident that happened beforehand. He liked guns, but he also had some weird behavioral problems, and he was starting to lash out, and he was starting to, have some angry outbursts, and he had some run-ins with police. And so one quick thing you can do, not just as a gun owner, but just as a private citizen that might be listening, is sort of a see something, say something model. Just be proactive ahead of these things, because obviously time after time we see there's a lot of red flag indicators that there might be something that's going to happen in these incidents. So,
yeah, I think that's one area where you probably see a lot of agreement among gun owners, which is to more effectively use current law to try and intervene with these potential shooters, as you just mentioned there. Obviously there's still vigorous debate over red flag laws in particular, sure. The extreme risk protection orders, and whether or not those are good policy is something that is still debated among most gun owners. There's obviously significant support. You have people like David French. You've even had the National Rifle Association and Republican senators in theory supporting the concept of red flag laws, but there's been a lot of dispute over how they've been drafted in practice in many blue states, with concerns over how the process is initiated, who can actually file for a red flag order. Some states it's much broader than others. Generally speaking, it's family members or police or mental health professionals or school officials, which probably is something that a lot of people would agree on with those standards. But some are looser than that, and right. People worry about abuse of the system, there not being enough safeguards, sure. Or if somebody files a false red flag order against you, there's concerns over, obviously these are temporary orders, so they're held to a lower standard of evidence than something like involuntary commitment, right? Potentially, or at least the process is easier for a red flag order than it is for involuntary commitment. And then there's concerns over the fact that it's a lower evidentiary process, and right. It affects a constitutional right, of course. But as David, we just had a whole episode on the podcast about this last week, about red flag laws, and David French made his case, which is a strong case. There's strong counterpoints to it, but we have similar restraining orders for domestic violence incidents as well. Right. And then there's obviously the critique that all red flag orders do is take away somebody's guns. It doesn't necessarily make them less dangerous. It doesn't mitigate all of the risks they pose. But I would feel like, I don't know. I guess I'm getting on one specific policy question here. Right. That's I'll try to give a couple more after this. But my feeling is that you could mitigate a lot of these concerns, and perhaps that's something that Democrats and Republicans should be able to find solutions for. These concerns seem like ones that are addressable to me, while the policy seems clear in how it at least could be utilized to stop mass shootings. Again, this is not it's another area where it's easy to say, well, just pass red flag laws, but they're not a foolproof solution all the time either. Buffalo shooting happened, even though he very clearly should have been red flagged. Right. He was evaluated, but released without any further action taken against him. And then he went on to buy his gun and commit a shooting. He may have, even if he had been red flagged, he may have been able to obtain a gun illegally. Anyway, that's another critique, of course, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't make it harder for someone with those explicit warning signs based on things they have actually done and there is evidence of. But as far as what else can gun owners in particular do to address mass shootings, or how to put forward policies to help prevent mass shootings? I mean, there's being proactive in your community is obviously one thing where if you know somebody who's having mental health struggles, like you said, there are avenues to, one, get them help, but also ensure that they're not a threat to other people. That could involve calling the police if there's a serious enough threat involved. I think, again, I don't think any of this is going to be some foolproof thing that's always going to prevent every shooting, because it's not easy to necessarily pick the handful of people out of 340 million who are going to, who's acting out is going to end in a mass killing event. Right. But yeah, I think proactivity, actually trying to follow through on somebody who's exhibiting the kind of warning signs, this, because you're right, we hear about it all the time with these cases where somebody does this and it turns out that there were a lot of warning signs and maybe they weren't acted on or weren't put together into a pattern by anyone. And nothing was done and they end up having no disqualifying criminal record when they go to buy their guns, even if they had a number of incidents that, had they been taken to the fruition of a prosecution or a commitment, the person would not have been able to legally buy guns. But yeah, I mean, I think there's also a good point in there about if there's no coherent response from the gun rights community for these events, then it does it does make it seem as though the only people offering real solutions are the gun control advocates. And so that is a real danger, I think, in the public perception. You have to come up with solutions that are actually going to have an impact, and be able to explain why things like total categorical bans on types of guns aren't going to be a successful intervention. Which again, you could, just as red flag laws were not used in the New York shooting, there is an assault weapons ban in New York, and he bought a New York legal AR and then modified it illegally. So, obviously those solutions aren't panaceas either.
Right. And just, another thing similar to being proactive doesn't necessarily even have to do with guns or involving, red flag orders. It's just a lot of these folks are people that live in communities where people are aware of these people in the communities. They realize that they're sometimes ostracized and lonely. And sometimes, just be a good neighbor, reach out to people, just person to person type stuff. You don't even have to involve the gun necessarily. Just be aware. Notice if people in your orbit are seeming like they're in crisis. Do what you can to reach out. A lot of that stuff could be helpful as well. Again, not a panacea, but it's better than not doing anything.
Right, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that is one problem with the framing of the question, I guess, is like, what are gun owners supposed to do? Well, it's not just gun owners. I understand what he means,
Yeah.
of course, but yeah, I mean, like you look at a lot of these shooters, and it's clear that they had very little support from their community or their families. Were they come from broken families where things were not going well. The shooter's mother there's reports about drug use and uh, no reports about his father. There's all reports about bullying and poor relations with other people. These are common things that you hear, which are sort of a societal level issue. Uh, of course, not everyone again, these are like not everyone who's had a rough childhood or a bad family situation is going to. Certainly, the vast majority of people like that are not going to end up being mass shooters, but yes, I mean, taking a societal health approach towards the situation is legitimate as well, even if, again, it's not some scalpel like, precision to addressing the issue of particular mass shooters.